Hey guys, what's up? Tyler here, and welcome to another episode of Star Trek's Ancient Civilizations. After the release of the last episode about the early Vulcans, I released a poll on Twitter in my community tab asking you guys who you want to see in the next video. It was a close race, but ultimately, between the results of the polls on both platforms, Borg won out. The Borg are one of the most recognizable races in Star Trek, both in name and in appearance. The name Borg has become synonymous in popular culture with a hive mind society, and it serves well to connote the nature of their collective. We're given hints throughout the franchise as to the rough time frames of their origins, although the true depth of their history, at least in canon, is still a mystery. In this video, I'll examine various accounts of the Borg's ancient past and attempt to construct a rough timeline of the collective and its expansion throughout the Milky Way. For this video, I'm actually going to document each theoretical stage of Borg history in reverse chronological order. And then at the end, we'll recap by going forward in time. And I'm going to be including both canon and non-canon sources so as to not limit our scope, but I'll be sure to make it clear what I'm referencing. The most recent hard date, so to speak, for the formation in canon of the Borg Collective is given as the 15th century AD, specifically the year 1484. According to the Voyager episode Dragon's Teeth, around this time the Borg controlled only a handful of solar systems in the Delta Quadrant, a species with a deep connection to every region of the quadrant, the Vadoir, considered them a minor nuisance. But as we know, by the 24th century, the Borg Collective had assimilated thousands of worlds. Technically speaking, this 15th century date is not necessarily the origin of the Borg per se, but the extent of their reach nearly a millennium before Voyager takes place. The Destiny novel series suggests that they arose from a colony of the Celiar species around 4527 BC. According to this account, the Borg Collective was created by the forcible merging of the Celiar with temporally displaced human Starfleet officers and Makos from the 22nd century. The Celiar subsequently assimilated the planet Arahaz, where the merging took place, and expanded from there. But according to Guinan in the Next Generation episode Q Who, and expounded upon in Star Trek First Contact, the Borg have been developing for thousands of centuries, dating back to at least the Pleistocene epoch. Guinan and the Borg Queen indicate that the Borg evolved into a mixture of organic and artificial life with cybernetic enhancements. During this phase of their existence, according to William Shatner and Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens' 1996 Trek novel The Return and Michael Jan Friedman's 1999 Trek story The Hunted, the Borg assimilated worlds throughout the Delta Quadrant, including the home of the Hirogen, the namesake for a massive communications relay network later discovered by Voyager. But wait, I hear you say eagerly. Didn't you just get through talking about how the Borg only controlled a handful of systems in the 15th century? Why are you including non-canon information that directly contradicts the shows and movies? Well, this gets at the heart of one of the most interesting phenomena that I encountered when doing the research about the Borg. In fact, you could say that this is one of the things that inspired me to make this episode in the first place. Not many are familiar with this hypothesis, but as various Star Trek fans and novelists have speculated, it's possible that there were multiple incarnations of the Borg, with multiple waves of expansion and contraction of their territory defining their true history. This is how the Borg could have been a minor nuisance at a much more recent date in the past and a major galactic player thousands of years before that. The Borg that our Starfleet heroes encounter on screen is merely the latest incarnation of the Borg. This is a theory that admittedly is highly speculative, as it incorporates story elements outside of the canon that were shown on screen. But for the sake of this timeline, I think it's at least interesting to ponder the implications of multiple Borg incarnations. These incarnations could be defined either as different tribes with different approaches to managing the collective, or completely separate species entirely, recurring periodically like a universal constant. When examined in this fashion, it becomes clear that the Borg are like a virus.
In my century, they'd only assimilated a handful of systems. It looks like they've spread through the quadrant like a plague.
From a singular origin point, they can spread out and infect other beings in the galaxy, mostly concentrated in the Delta Quadrant. After their decline due to some hypothetical, unforeseen disaster, a mutation can resurge, and repeat the process all over again. This contextualizes a lot of Borg encounters documented in various novels, short stories, and video games. In Jean Deweese's 1992 novel Probe, it's said that the Borg attempted to assimilate the cetacean probe seen in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home around 307,000 years ago. The assimilation failed, although the Borg did succeed in damaging the probe's computer core, and this is given as an explanation for why the probe tried to damage Earth's atmosphere in The Voyage Home. The Borg subsequently attempted to assimilate the homeworld of the probe's creators, but the creators fought back, eventually escaping from the Borg threat in a manner similar to the El-Orians, Guinan species. If we keep going back even further, we eventually run into supposed interactions between the Borg and the Preservers. The Preservers are, of course, another ancient race who are responsible for transplanting various endangered cultures from one place to another throughout the galaxy. Their canon activities date to just a few thousand years ago, according to the original series episode The Paradise Syndrome. But TNG writer Ronald D. Moore has given credence to the idea that the Preservers are the same race as the ancient humanoids featured in The Chase. Despite the age difference, as the ancient humanoids lived 4.5 billion years ago, this connection is confirmed in Star Trek Online and various other non-canon sources. As far as the Preservers' encounters with the Borg go, Peter David's 1991 novel Vendetta and the 2001 Voyager comic Planet Killer suggest that Borg fleets threatened the Preservers and may have even driven them close to extinction. This could have resulted in a long period of galactic history without the Preservers' influence before their resurgence far down the line. Furthermore, it suggested that the Preservers, in a last-ditch effort, created neutronium-powered doomsday devices, or planet killers, such as the one featured in the original series episode, The Doomsday Machine. Pretty damn cool. These doomsday devices would have been created to keep the Borg in check, but none were ever activated, being left to wander the galaxy for eons. In all of these accounts, though, one thing remains consistent across interpretations. Even given a plain, simple reading of the Borg Queen's dialogue in First Contact, the Borg most likely started out as a normal, regular civilization where it seems that experiments with artificial intelligence and cybernetic enhancement went awry. This may be what happened multiple times to cause resurgences of the Borg, with a new Species Zero starting the chain reaction each time. In fact, in 3 separate Star Trek short stories and comics, 2003's The Beginning by Annie Reed, 2004's Forgotten Light by Frederick Kim, and the 2006 TOS manga Side Effects by Chris Dowes, 3 distinct, separate species originally from the Delta Quadrant become the Borg as an unintended side effect of medical experimentation with nanotechnology. The 2006 video game Star Trek Legacy even makes a connection between the Borg and Voyager from the motion picture, asserting that the Borg are the inhabitants of the machine planet that Voyager encountered. Before his death, Gene Roddenberry remarked that this could be the case, but it was never explicitly said anywhere else, canon or not, and many dismiss the Borg-Voyager connection as unnecessary, as it makes the universe smaller and creates a narrative simply out of the human need for structure and order. Another reason this connection is dubious is because Voyager's path to the Sol system runs through Klingon territory, which is in the opposite direction from the core of the Federation than the Delta Quadrant. Even if Voyager had traveled through a black hole to get back home, which is very possible, one could argue that the connection is still forced, although we can't know for sure. In any case, the fact that all these incarnations, as far as we're aware, arose in the Delta Quadrant is curious. It is somewhat indicative of the fact that the Borg in canon may have always been intended to be the same singular species, starting out in the Pleistocene and culminating in the Borg that we're familiar with on screen. But even given the lack of canon evidence for some of these earlier incarnations, the truth is that the galaxy is a big place, and there's a lot of time that one can cover when delving into the depths of galactic history. If Season 1 of Star Trek Picard is any indication, then the cyclical waves of artificial intelligence rising and falling throughout the galaxy may be the norm, and the Borg, though distinct from androids due to their more explicit mixing of organic tissue, may simply be a variation on this pattern. Side note, I like how the Borg storyline in Season 1 of Star Trek Picard was kind of dropped and didn't directly tie in with the admonition, at least as far as we're aware currently. But maybe in Future seasons will learn more. So let's recap, because there's a lot here. As far back as billions of years ago, one of the earliest incarnations of the Borg may have arisen, presumably one of the child races of the progenitors, aka the preservers. These cybernetic beings fought with their creators, eventually destroying them like the Klingons would slay their gods. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, an incarnation of the Borg, having assimilated numerous systems throughout the Delta Quadrant, supposedly had encounters with the creators of the Cetacean probe, as well as the Hirogen and more. Another distinct incarnation of the Borg, one of many in fact, would arise on a planet in the Delta Quadrant as a technologically advanced, scientifically curious race experiments with nanotechnology, and things don't go as planned. Towards the end of the Pleistocene and beginning of the Holocene, yet another distinct incarnation of the Borg would arise and begin to assimilate systems in the Delta Quadrant, according to the Last Unicorn RPG module, All Our Yesterdays, the time travel sourcebook. Another origin point of the Borg would arise just 5,800 years later on the planet Arahaz, when temporarily displaced Celiar and Starfleet officers are assimilated. Finally, the current incarnation of the Borg would arise in the Delta Quadrant around the late 15th century, controlling a few systems at first, and eventually becoming the dominant power in the quadrant. So as I mentioned before, most of this information should be taken with a grain of salt, and much of it taken together can come off as frankly quite contradictory. That's because it is. And as some have pointed out, having an air of mystery around the Borg's true origins is quite enticing. But I think that the general idea of a Borg collective that comes in waves, rising and falling over millennia, and recurring like a virus, is at least interesting to consider. It would actually tie together the two seemingly disparate pieces of dialogue from both The Next Generation and Voyager regarding the Borg's distant origins, their evolution, and their territorial expansion. Of course, I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the very real connection that the Borg share with the Federation and humanity. As we see in Star Trek First Contact, the Borg's attempt to disrupt the timeline by preventing Zefram Cochrane's warp flight in 2063 backfires as the USS Enterprise E intervenes, thereby resulting in the restoration of the timeline and creation of a Pogo paradox. The consequences of this are further demonstrated in the Enterprise episode Regeneration, in which leftover Borg drones frozen in the Arctic are reactivated in 2153 and send a signal with Earth's coordinates to the Delta Quadrant. This is what likely led the Borg to start making their way towards Federation space by the 24th century, with their first face-to-face encounter being facilitated by Q in 2365. See? It's all connected. I won't go in depth into Borg history as it pertains to what we see in the various shows and films, as this is distinctly current history as opposed to their ancient origins. Trexpertise has an excellent video where he details Borg history in full, and that video also served as another inspiration for my deep dive into the Borg's origins. I hope that this video has been informative. It certainly was for me. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and comment, and don't forget to share it. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. And as always, if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do that. And click the bell icon so you'll receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, you can become a patron or a YouTube member. Links to those, as well as my social media and merch store, are in the description below. Last but not least, be sure to let me know in the comments what species you would like to see me feature in a future episode of Star Trek's Ancient Civilizations. That's all I have for today, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Live long and prosper.